Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a couple of IPAs. One you probably already recognize, the brewer, just based on the can design. But one is a beer we're going to start with from a brewer I've never had anything from prior. So always exciting to try new beers from new breweries. I've never had any offerings. Both I did source from Tavour. We're going to be starting with Imaginations, and that's Imagine Nations, not imagination. Two separate words. Imagine Nations, Non-Duality. This is a New England IPA. Clocks in at 6.5% ABV. They're based out of Missoula, Montana, and I'm positive that this is the first beer I have had from Montana. So this is going to be also first, along with the beer. Now, I don't know specifically what all hops that they put in for their IPA bill, but I do know that they did dry hop with Nelson Sauvin. Moving on to beer number two, as you may have already guessed, this is Hubbard's Cave. They do great, basically milk imperial stouts, but they also put out some really solid IPAs, and I've tried quite a few. This is one of their newer releases. The Fresh V36 is the name of this one. Clocks in at 8.5%, so it's on the border. You could call it an imperial. They don't. They're based out of Niles, Illinois, and this one has a blend of Cashmere, Citra, and El Dorado hops. So two different ends of the spectrum, a New England style lower ABV range and a higher ABV. Don't really know what to anticipate from this one, but they do tend to be very hop forward, and quite a few I've had have been very bitter forward. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in, starting with Imaginations, Non-Duality, the New England IPA that clocks in at 6.5% ABV. Okay, so jumping right in with the first beer of today's IPA review. We have got first beer I've ever had out of this state or from this brewer. This is Imaginations, Non-Duality, a New England style IPA. Clocks in at 6.5% ABV. They are based in Missoula, Montana. I do know it's been dry hopped with Nelson Sauvin, but I don't know what they wet hop with, if they had any other hop varieties. That's unbeknownst to me. But I'm very excited to jump in, and label art, I like it. It's I'm not really sure exactly what I'm looking at. Maybe a cow, split kind of a reflection. I don't know, but it's very colorful, kind of a very neat can design. I'm a big fan. So without further ado, let's get this one cracked into my all-purpose Sam Adams glass. Works great for IPAs as I wrap my Sierra Nevada hat. So I'm just getting all sorts of representation out here. And no, I am not sponsored. I just like the brands and I like their stuff. So let's get this poured right in. Yeah, it's a lovely IPA. Lovely IPA. Get a little agitation. This whole can's not going to fit in this glass anyway. It's not a 16-ounce glass. Just does hold 12 if you're lucky. Turn that around so the label will face you. But visually, very nice looking IPA. It's very active in terms of carbonation. It's very light, very straw yellow color, very pale. There's a slight occlusion to it. Not all New England styles are super hazy, but this one definitely has a slight bit of a haze to it. It's slightly occluded. Very carbonated, and I can see the activity is going quite briskly. It's got a mix of small and medium carbonation coming up. So it formed an okay head to start, but I don't think it's going to stick around too long. It is quite active in terms of carbonation, but looks great. Let's give it a sniff. Oh yeah, that smells very nice. That smells like ripe fruit, and it's kind of a mix of citrus and tropical fruit. Reminds me most of maybe mangoes on the tropical side, mangoes and something else. Something else I know I've had, but it's eluding me. But the mango comes through quite strongly, and the citrus smells kind of like a cross between grapefruit mixed with tangerine. That's what it really smells like. It smells very nice, very crisp, very fresh. So without further ado, let's jump in and see what this one's about. Oh, that's a very nice IPA. It's a very nice IPA. Okay, so What I picked up in the aroma does come through more or less in the flavor as well. There is a suggestion of tropical fruit, and it does kind of sort of taste a little bit like mango, but also tastes a little bit like there's passion fruit. So that's kind of the two major tropical fruit side of the hop flavor profile I'm getting. And for the citrus, yeah, it really does taste a bit like a cross of grapefruit and tangerine, though it is a lot more dominant in terms of what you would expect from the rind, from the zest. It's got a more bitter profile to the citrus side, and it's very nice. In terms of other kind of aspects that you would occasionally get in IPAs, kind of in my different spectrum, I kind of break down into subcategories. There's no real sense of pine, no resinous qualities here at all. A slight bit of earthiness only on the back, and really that's not coming so much from this earthy, hop bitter flavor coming through in and of itself, so much as it is from the bittering effect from what tastes like citrus rind, and it's really more like oils. They have a natural bitterness, but it's very nice, it's very bright. It's got a lot more depth of flavor than I anticipated, certainly based on just the original smell of it, but also just based on the style. It's got a lot more flavor forward profile to it, and it's not what I would term overtly juicy. It's not. It's not one of those you say, wow, that's a juice bomb, and it's just like a fruit juice explosion. It's not at all. This tastes very much like a proper IPA, not accentuating juice, just focused on hops and letting their intrinsic characteristics come out. It's very, very nice, very enjoyable. I'm going to jump in for body and mouthfeel, explore this flavor development a bit more. Body's somewhere between medium light and teetering on the edge of medium. Feels appropriate for the ABV range. Mouthfeel, very much classic IPA. It's got a little resistance to it, but there's nothing crazy. It matches the body, and it's appropriate for the ABV range. In terms of what the agitation quality happens on the palate, it does get a little thicker, a little creamier. It's not foamy, it's not bubbly. It does thicken and get a little creamy, but it's not super silky. It just adds a little extra textural dimension if you do agitate it vigorously across the palate. In terms of how the flavor develops, it does taste quite bright, quite fruity up front when you first get it in your mouth, especially under vigorous agitation. But as soon as you swallow, essentially the fruit that you got in the aroma comes through, and it really blossoms quite quickly and intensifies quite quickly within 1 second of swallowing. And then the additional fruit kind of comes in. So there's kind of this passion fruit that comes in and mixes with what tastes like the mango, tastes like mango to me. There's also a little bit of just a suggestion of strawberry on the back, and I'm not surprised by that. I don't know if this is a typical quality of Nelson Sauvin or if it's just something that my palate picks up, but quite a few Nelson Sauvin based IPAs I've have had this suggestion of what tastes like strawberry, and it's very nice. It pairs very well with the classic qualities of this beer anyway, but it's not a flavor you get all the time in a beer, let alone in an IPA. It's very enjoyable. I'm going to jump in for one more sip, make sure I'm not missing anything critical here. Very bright, very fruit forward. Then it's immediate mango, passion fruit, tangerine, grapefruit. It's very nice, very nice. And it's got a pretty quick intensity holds, and then it's a pretty quick descent as well. The finish isn't super long in terms of an IPA, but it's not short either. It's not short. The intensity on the end of the finish, that kind of diminishes quite quickly, but it does stick around a pretty good distance on the end of each finish. And really it's on the end after about 10-15 seconds after you swallow. That's when this kind of strawberry, and there may be additional kind of berry qualities that are coming through. It's quite nice, and it pairs well with how this beer finishes. Very nice, very well balanced. I'm a fan of this. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to IPA number 2 and that is Hubbard's Cave Fresh V36 IPA, which clocks in at 8.5% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's IPA review, we have got Hubbard's Cave Fresh V36 IPA. This one clocks in at 8.5% ABV. They're based out of Niles, Illinois. If you've seen a lot of reviews, you know that we do a good mix of their beers. Mainly what I've gotten up to this point have been multiple of their IPAs, as well a lot of their flavored imperial milk stouts. But their IPAs are just as big and bold and intense as their flavored imperial milk stouts, and it's a nice thing. They do good beers up there. I'm always keeping my eyes out for anything new that comes out and if there's any new styles that come down the pike. But back to IPAs. So for this one, they brewed with a blend of Cashmere, Citra, and El Dorado hops. So a really good, interesting mix here. El Dorado you get every once in a while. Citra is very, very mainstream. Everybody knows that as a high alpha acid content hop with big, bold aromas and flavors. And then on the end, we got Cashmere. Now this is another nice hop strain. I've seen it in quite a few different IPAs I've had. I've never had just Cashmere hops in an IPA, but it does add some different aromas and flavors you don't normally get. So I'm really excited to see what this specific blend brings to the table. 8.5, they could technically start to consider this an imperial, but it's really just on the high end of the normal range. Honestly, either way, it doesn't matter. I'd say the low end typically for most imperials is going to be 9, but it does vary by style. And there's no hard and fast rule, but 8.5, it's a good high ABV on an IPA. So let's just get this cracked. All right. And poured right in the glass. All right, very, very active in terms of carbonation, so it looks like it's doing a pretty decent head. I'm going to slow it down a bit here, because that's going to have to settle. So I'm not going to get that whole can in there anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so visually, this is very hazy. It's a very, very hazy IPA. It's also very light in color. It's kind of that classic straw yellow, that very pale yellow, but with little hints of orange. So it doesn't look dissimilar to, say, a glass of orange juice. It's about that same shade, and it's about that same appearance in terms of occlusion. It is a cloudy, it is a hazy beer, formed just a really thick, lush head on top. So let's get down over this and give it a sniff. Oh yeah. Oh, that smells great. Very fresh. The dominant aroma that's coming through is fruit. Fresh, ripe fruit. There's a little bit of citrus and there's a little bit of some other underlying fruits. I wouldn't say it's tropical fruit so much. It's just a blend of different citrus and maybe some berry-like qualities. So really what jumps out to me is a blend of orange, a blend of grapefruit, and maybe even a suggestion of mixed berries, like raspberry. There's this slight raspberry aroma, maybe even just a suggestion of banana. I know that sounds weird, but that's the aroma, the way that it's blending, that's what it smells like. It smells very good. It smells like a glass of fruit juice, and it doesn't look dissimilar. So I'm gonna just add just a tick more here, gently, to get this up nearer to the bottom of the bulb. There we go. All right. And without further ado, let's give this a sip. Yeah, head's a little thicker than I normally dive in, but it really did a great job forming and it's retaining well. So we'll have to deal with a messy beard. It's very nice. Oh, there it comes in. Kind of takes a few seconds. So the first thing that you get when you get it in your mouth is this sensation of underlying bitters. And there's some flavors, but they're not really popping. Then after about 2-3 seconds, the flavors just boom. They immediately kind of come and make themselves present. And it is kind of matching what I was picking up in terms of the aroma. So you definitely are getting underlying citrus. There's a little hint of orange. there's a stronger hint of grapefruit, but there's a large hint of what smells like citric oils and tastes like citric oils. So it's a little more bitter. It's almost like the zest or the rind, where it's got all that natural oil in it, and it does impart large quantities of both aroma and flavor. But another thing with the rind, the zest, the oils from the skin of the citrus fruit, is you get these underlying bitters. And this is not a pungently bitter IPA by any stretch of the imagination, but that does help the cause. It comes up a little bit. That's kind of the first thing I get. And really, in terms of the way that the bitters are presenting themselves, it is very citrus forward, but there is a little bit of an underlying earthiness to it and a slight suggestion of kind of a pine and resinous quality to it. But overall, I think it's very nice. It's not super pungent to the point that somebody just getting into IPAs would be put off by it. Not at all. I think it's very approachable in terms of bitter intensity, and it's got a lot of different interesting layers of flavor. It's very nice. I'm going to jump in for body and mouthfeel, think about these flavors as they develop a bit more. Body on this is a solid medium heavy, 8.5%. That's a pretty high ABV, and it feels appropriate for the ABV range. It's got a nice, robust body to it. Mouthfeel is typical IPA. It's not flat at all. There's some nice resistance to it. It's got a little bit of a thickness. It's got some viscosity, but it's not over the top. It's not like an imperial stout, clocking 14, 15% at all. It matches and goes perfectly in tandem with the body, and it's exactly what I expected for an IPA of this range, both body and mouthfeel. They really did a great job. It feels right in the mouth in this ABV range. In terms of how the flavor develops and how it kind of finishes it out, I stand by my initial reaction. It takes a few seconds and then it pops out, and then you get all the underlying currents of flavor and the various kind of bitter sensations. But how does that actually finish out on the end? So it kind of starts out and then a quick ramp up and holds, and then a pretty quick ramp down, and it kind of holds again. So it shoots up really quickly after a little delay. So it's kind of a big long skew on the end of the bell curve if you try to picture that shape of how the flavor profile develops. And then it's even again on the other side. So it's got these outlying extremes before the ramp up and the ramp down. It doesn't hold that long, but in terms of the length of the finish, it's quite a bit longer than I would anticipate, considering the general lack of pungency of the bitters. They're there. It's just not a big bold in your face. This is not a West Coast style, trying to see how many IBUs we can cram into the beer. That's not what it's about. It's about the aromas and the flavors. Without having found any information on it, I am positive that they did a good bit of dry hopping, because it's really imparting these aromas far more pronounced than you would get in your average IPA. And indeed, it's translating into the glass. It's a very nice beer. I'm going to jump in for one more sip for final thoughts. If you agitate on the palate, it does get very silky creamy. The thickness quality just increases and it gets very silky, very lush. In terms of the flavors, there's nothing really else that I picked out on that third dive that I hadn't already mentioned. It's very nice, and the way that it ramps, it's very kind of interesting. Now, on my third sip, I did notice that kind of the peak intensity of bitters actually is a little more bold than I got on the first two sips, but it's not over the top. It is a little more peaky, but it doesn't maintain that level of bitter intensity for that long before it kind of dies back down. But it's very nice, very well balanced beer. I like it. The balance of all the different hop varieties, what they're bringing to the table, very well selected malt bill, and nice dry hopping to get, I presume dry hopping, whatever they did. It's got a nice bit of aroma to match the flavor. It's very, very nice indeed. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these delicious IPAs, we're going to get them ranked, starting with the Imagination Brewing's Nonduality. This is a New England style IPA, clocked in at 6.5% ABV. They're based out of Missoula, Montana. Starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was nice. It was just fine. It had above average pungency, but you couldn't really get that big of intensity on the aroma. So it was kind of nice because I didn't know what to expect when I jumped into it, but I've mentioned this on many reviews. We taste first with our nose. Greater than 90% of the sensation to taste is related to smell. So having a beer that's not as pungent in aroma does actually affect the flavor profile and what you perceive. But nonetheless, it was high end of average. It gets a 6 out of 10. For the taste, while the aroma wasn't super pungent, what did come through translated into the beer. That's not always the case. It was in this one, and it was very nice. And I'm pleased to report that the taste was far more intense than the aroma. It was very enjoyable. Many different layers of different fruit flavors and hop flavors and sensations, as well as bitters. At a New England style, only 6.5, I was impressed. Well above average, it gets an 8 out of 10. For the body, yet again, this is another category that did rather impress me. 6.5, that's not a high ABV range for an IPA by any stretch. And this IPA really did have some backbone. It had some structure, it had some breadth to it. Wasn't the top tier for this ABV range, but well above average. It gets an 8 out of 10. Moving on to the mouthfeel. I was surprised at the depth that the mouthfeel had. The body, I was impressed. The mouthfeel really kind of blew me away. It had a lot more resistance and viscosity to it. And it wasn't overt. It wasn't insane like high end. It's only 6.5. It was perfectly appropriate for the style and the ABV range. And it did not miss the mark. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish. The finish on this beer, considering the style and the relative lack of pungency of the bitters, I was actually impressed with how long each end to the finish on each sip lasted. Certainly well above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a pretty good job. Pouring at home, you never really know what you're going to get. I've mentioned this as well many times. Cleanliness of glassware, how vigorously or non-vigorously you pour it, the angle at which point you start to tilt and tilt back, and the speed. It all plays a part to how well a beer pours at home. 99% of the time, the head formation and retention is not going to be anywhere near the quality you get with that you order from a tap at a bar. They've got a keg set up. We're just pouring from a can or a bottle into a glass. So there's a lot of human error elements that can transpire, but this one did a good job. It was above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. Moving on to the appearance. The appearance on this beer was almost textbook what I expect for a New England style IPA of this range. I would have expected maybe a bit more haze than was presented, but it was nice. It was a nice, light, straw, pale yellow color. Beautiful. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the balance. The balance on this beer was exceptional. I really enjoyed what they did with this. The hops that they used both in the boil and the dry hopping, I'm assuming which they did, most beer producers today that are producing IPAs, they're going to be dry hopping to some extent. And it really paid dividends here because the balance of the hops and the hop characteristics were just so exceptional. You could individually pick out, oh, I'm getting this flavor now, I'm getting this flavor now, I'm getting this flavor now. Oh, now I'm getting this aroma, I'm getting this aroma, and they all popped out beautifully. It gets a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I loved it. I did. New England style IPAs and in general lower ABV IPAs, they're not what I go to when I'm drinking for my pleasure, but I am a massive hop head. I love IPAs. But this one was very well crafted. I would have liked still just a little more intensity of bitters. Probably would have put it over the top for me, but as it stands, well above average, it gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I've had a ton of lower ABV IPAs. I've had a ton of New England style. This, to be both New England and lower ABV, I thought did just a tremendous job. It was far more flavorful than your average New England in terms of both flavors it produced from the hops as well as bitter intensity, which is important in an IPA. Really, I thought they did a fantastic job here. Excellent. I give it a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Imagination's Nonduality to an 81 out of 100, which puts it squarely in the well above average range. If you're a fan of the style, I do highly recommend this one. Moving on to beer number 2. This is Hubbard's Cave Fresh V36 IPA, 8.5% on this one. They're based out of Niles, Illinois. Starting with the aroma. Now the aroma on this one was noticeably a bit more pungent than on the first, but neither of these really blew my socks off. Above average, it gets a 7 out of 10. For the taste. The taste on this one, it was enjoyable. Don't get me wrong, it was a very tasty beer, and it was indeed above average, but I would have liked a lot more intensity of all of the different flavor components that all the hops they used put through, as well as bitter intensity. It was nice, but it wasn't top tier. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the body on this one absolutely was tremendous. It was quite a bit more robust than you'd anticipate from an IPA in this range, but it wasn't over the top. It was perfectly appropriate and they nailed it. Gets a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, just as with the body, I was equally impressed. It had the right amount of resistance and viscosity, and there was nothing lacking, and the body and the mouthfeel matched, which really, if you get one that's far higher or lower than the other, it can be a bit of a weird beer drinking experience. This was very much in harmony. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish, I was kind of surprised on this one because this did have a good bit of pungency of flavor. And I finally, on the third sip in, got a lot more punch come through and a lot more bitter punch come through, but it didn't translate into a very, very long finish. It was above average, but not top tier. It gets a 7 out of 10. Head and retention, this one did a tremendous job at home. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance. For a hazy and New England style, that's exactly what I expect. It was very light, very pale, just perfectly cloudy, occluded. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer overall was nice. I still was craving more pungency of flavor and certainly more pungency of hops. You get 8.5%. And, you know, it does take a little more hops when you add in more fermentables. I've mentioned this many, many times, and I proved this fact in my own home brewing experiments. If you're going to go for a higher ABV IPA and you want it to come off as an IPA, the bitters are the backbone, kind of the swan song, hallmark of the style. You have to extract more alphas into the beer during the boil. It just has to happen or it's going to feel like it's missing something. And this one was above average, but not top tier. Gets a 7 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I enjoyed the beer. I did. I enjoyed the beer, but same thing I've said multiple times now. I was craving more flavor. I was craving more hops. And overall, there were a few categories that missed the mark for me by just a shade. I thought it was above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style. You know, it is what it is. It was a good beer. I did enjoy it. It's one I would happily drink anytime. Would I actively seek, you know, to purchase this versus something new to try? Probably not, but I did enjoy the beer overall. I thought they did a good job, and I thought it was above average. It gets a 7 out of 10, which brings the total score on Hubbard's Cave Fresh V36 to an 82 out of 100. So all total, a 1-point spread, an 81 and an 82, both well above average offerings, and both relatively similar styles, just varying in intensity of ABV volume. So folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. All three of those really help the channel, helps others find us, and I want to interact with you, so let me know what you think. Seriously, leave me some comments. If you want to stay in the loop on our videos, go live to YouTube. If you haven't already done so, you can click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.